So, I want to talk about a friend of mine for a minute called Mark Pilkington. Those of you interested in UFOs remember this name. Mark Pilkington writes a website called Strange Attractor. It'd be like what Blather.net is if it had any class, basically. And Mark's one of those sickeningly talented people. And I ran into Mark recently, and I always like bouncing ideas off him. He's the author of a book called Mirage Men about ufology, which has been published in 2010. I was talking about this process of blather, rinse, repeat, and so on, and he said he sees something very similar in ufology, whereby he feels that ufologists make demands and assertions, and they request that government respond to their requests. Then the government eventually does respond and says, okay, here's your response, and then the ufologist says, I don't care. They reject the response. And that, you know, they're asking people in positions of authority to respond to their assertions and claims. Once they get the response, they simply reject it. Now, it's up to you whether or not, you know, you can decide if you think that's true or not, but I was struck by the parallel between what Mark was saying and the kind of thing I was seeing on 9/11. Let's talk about another example. A gentleman called Wally Miller, the coroner in Somerset County. In other words, the gentleman who was on the scene at Flight 93. What is a coroner? A coroner's job, amongst many things, is to determine the cause of death. Okay. Wally Miller is quoted as saying, I stopped being a coroner after about 20 minutes because there were no bodies there. Now, that's the quote that's used in the conspiracy theories. There were no bodies there. I stopped being a coroner after 20 minutes. The BBC documentary, which I showed you a clip of a moment ago, went along and met Wally Miller and said, this is what you've been quoted as saying, well, how do you feel about that, what do you think? And in looking for this particular quote, I came across a little video on YouTube. And I remember what it said, it's blather, rinse, repeat, you know, the assertion, the rebuttal, and then the we don't care. We're going to go back to your original quote bit. So the next part is this is the BBC clip that I found on YouTube, which the YouTube poster has top and tailed with their own interpretation. For those of you interested, you can explore the original video below at the hyperlink. And this text is not mine, it's the text of the gentleman who put the video on YouTube.
I said that I stopped being a coroner after about 20 minutes because it was perfectly clear what the cause and manner of death was going to be. It was a plane crash, but yet it was a homicide because the terrorists hijacked the plane and killed the people. So and the terrorists committed suicide. So from that point, yes, it was a misquote, because the point that I was trying to make was, after that, it more or less became a large funeral service. There's a fringe of people out there that want to try to make something out of it that isn't. I don't have any control over that. I guess that's what makes our country great. That you do whatever you want to do. I don't know.
You sound very phlegmatic about it all.
Well, I don't know that there's a lot you can do about it. I'm not going to sit here and get coronary arteries.
So again, we've got this process of, here's what you were originally supposed to have said. The guy responds and says, that's not what I said. And the conspiracy theorist goes, I don't care, but here's what he said originally anyway. So, it's a curious process. Again, it's blather, rinse, repeat for me. So, I want to talk a little bit more about a different conspiracy theory movie for a couple of moments called Zeitgeist the movie. Anybody here seen Zeitgeist the movie? Yeah, a few people have seen it. Zeitgeist the movie is a weird one because it's a brilliant piece of filmmaking. I think it's an absolutely incredible piece of filmmaking. I mentioned earlier on I work in e-learning, and e-learning is kind of the streaming of information through complex media sources. Zeitgeist the movie takes incredibly large amounts of information and presents them to you in a beautifully coherent fashion. And if I can draw your attention back to these three pieces of text in the middle. Remember I talked about digital winks, and trying to look for kind of online winks and what it means in this context. And the three that really, I'd encourage you to go back and watch Zeitgeist the movie again, because it's the mother of all conspiracy theory movies. And there are three things that which really struck me. There's this constant, insistent reference to the truth. Watch Zeitgeist the movie again and count the number of times you hear an insistence on the truth. I defy anybody to actually, come up with the truth for anything. The final truth of all things is there is no final truth. As Robert Anton Wilson was fond of saying, every perception is a gamble. You've got a story, I've got a counter story. You've got an assertion, I've got a rebuttal. You've got a debunk, a rebunk, and so on and so forth. The second one is they. Watch the movie again. How many times do you hear somebody referring to they? Who they? Who are you talking about? What organization are you referring to? Or the other one, them? And I say, just go take a random 10-minute section in the middle of Zeitgeist, the movie, or any of the conspiracy theory movies, and count the number of times you hear them refer to they or them without actually any explicit reference to who they're talking about. And that to me is kind of the digital wink, that behavior is modeled in the movies, kind of copied in the blogs, and in actual fact sometimes even copied in the rebuttals. In the rebuttals, they say, you know, they say in the theories, well, who? Did Dylan Avery say it, or did Alex Jones say it? And, you know, this kind of behavior kind of replicates itself a little bit, even on the part of the people trying to do the debunking. So, how does it function? There's a famous question in anthropology, how does it function? And there's a functional anthropology kind of looked at what was the purpose of a cultural phenomenon. And, or to put it another way, you know, why do these conspiracy theories exist? What's their purpose? What do they do? How do they come about? Well, what do they do? I'm not so sure. How do they come about? For me, this is now purely slipping into the personal and subjective opinion. There's 4 elements in this. The first of which is just complete cynicism. I think many Americans felt after the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan and the issue of the weapons of mass destruction that they simply couldn't believe anything that their government told them anymore. They simply couldn't believe anything that their government told them. So anything that that the government says has to be suspect. I think that's a very, very important aspect of this. The second one is an American cultural lens. I'm Irish, I live in the UK, and if you're Irish or if you've grown up in the UK or you've lived in Spain, you're used to terrorism. You've grown up with it. People who live in European countries accept terrorism. We don't like it, but it's part of the fabric of the weird fabric of the world in which we live. And, you know, we usually say, you know, okay, a terrorist attacked us, and we just accept that it was a terrorist because, you know, they're quite open about the fact they bombed us. For me, the United States of America doesn't have that cultural lens because it doesn't have that experience of terrorism. The last attack on American soil was Pearl Harbor, and it wasn't actually on American soil. When 9/11 happened, it was so dramatic, it was so movie-like, it was just so over the top. It was like the plot of a bad Bruce Willis movie or something that, you know, there was no cultural lens through which to understand this. So I think people combining that lack of a cultural lens with the cynicism, it very easily pushes you towards seeing conspiracy theory. And I'll admit to myself, on the day of 9/11, this just looks all rotten. There's something rotten about this. And it's a natural human reaction, I think, to look for the room with 12 guys and cigar smoke, twirling their moustaches somewhere in Zurich, you know, the Illuminati planning the running of the world. I don't believe in conspiracy theories of that size. I believe in conspiracy theories of incompetence, definitely. But, as I say, a cultural lens, you know, depending on where you're from, I think you react differently to great tragic events. The internet. It used to be that history was written by, you know, the winners, as they used to say, and, you know, history was written by historians. History's not written by historians anymore. History's written by the amateur, and I don't mean that, use that term in a derogatory fashion. But if Dylan Avery was able to buy a laptop at Radio Shack, a couple of $100, with him and his mates, with great passion and love and care, knocked out this movie that got seen by 100 million people. Most major Hollywood blockbusters don't get seen by 100 million people. And the internet facilitates the spread of these conspiracy theories and stories and narratives in a way that really didn't exist prior to this. I always think that our perception of the Kennedy assassination would be very different had it happened in the internet age. So we've got to be aware of how the machine is changing us too. And then, I hate to say it, but there's a lack of critical skills. I think in Western society we go through educational systems which teach us the exam, not the subject. They teach you the binary answer to a yes or no multiple choice question. They don't teach you to be critical, and I feel sometimes that too many people don't apply critical skills to what they're watching, what they're reading, or what they're hearing. And they get swayed by emotionality, because 9/11 is a hugely emotional thing. But also, if you go back and watch Zeitgeist, the movie, which I said is a great piece of filmmaking, it's very emotional. Brilliant use of music, very dramatic you know, text, and Bill Hicks is quoted, and Carl Sagan's quoted, and all my favourite heroes, and it's really persuasive. But you've got to step back, I think, and just be a little bit more cynical and critical and say, this person has an agenda, maybe. What's their agenda? You know, what is it they're trying to communicate? And you know, as Robert Anton Wilson was fond of saying, every perception is a gamble. So I think lack of critical skills are a key thing. This is not a work in progress. The talk is actually finished. That's my talk, and thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions or get shouted at for the next 10 minutes. Thanks very much.